Well, welcome back to our study of John. We are starting chapter 2 tonight, and we're in the quarantine control center. Garrett right now is taking a picture that we'll put up so you can see kind of what it looks like. We've got monitors and computers and everything, trying to work at home like a lot of people right now. But we're studying the Gospel of John. We talked about a couple weeks ago when we introduced this that there are a lot of studies going on right now about, kind of the times that we're living in. But as we keep talking about, at some point we've got to realize that even in bad times, God can use us for good things if we're looking to. And so one of the great things about studying the Gospel of John is that it's all about showing how that we can tell people about Jesus. That's really the point of what John writes. We mentioned in our very first study, and by the way, all of these are on the Bear Valley Church of Christ YouTube page. You can go back and look there. The Facebook page for the church and for the Bear Valley Bible Institute, my Facebook page. You can go back and study these, and I hope you'll share them with others. Lots of people at home looking for Bible studies, and so it's a great way we can share Jesus. That's what John's trying to do. John 20, 30 through 31 is the purpose statement of this gospel. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. And so we've talked about how that idea of Jesus doing these signs, and we've talked about that the signs are not always miraculous. All the miracles are signs, but not all the signs are miracles. But they all have a deeper, significant theological message that helps us to understand a little bit more about Jesus, which is important because Jesus is going to tell us in this gospel that when we know Him, we know the Father. And so that's what He's doing with these signs. And those signs help us to believe in Jesus, and believing in Him, we can have eternal life. And when we get to chapter 2, remember when John's writing this, I want to divide it up into chapters. But what we now recognize as John chapter 2, which is where we're ready to start tonight. My family's here. We're going to study this together with you, and we're thankful that you're here for that. But we're going to look at how He begins to put this into action. We've already talked about how that in the first chapter that He's tried to prove that Jesus is divinity, that Jesus is God. And if we get that, then followers of Jesus have to be finding others that they can point to Jesus and say, come and see, and show them how they can follow Jesus. And that cycle should continue. So when we find those people, what is it we want them to come and see? Well, we want them to see these evidences that He's given us in this great gospel about who Jesus is and why we need to believe in Him, and so that believing in Him we can have eternal life. So we've already talked about the key words. You can mark those key words in your Bible, and I hope that you will. It helps you kind of see some of the significant points that comes out. When you get into chapter 2, beginning in verse 1 and going down through verse 12 or so, is an account of the life of Jesus that, I'll be honest, most of the time we go to and we just really mess it up, because we go to it and all we want to talk about is alcohol or non-alcohol. Or I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to talk about that. And usually what happens is when even guys that get it, a lot of times they'll say, no, that's not the purpose of these first 12 verses. But while we're here, let's go ahead and talk about it. Well, we're not going to talk about it because that's another study for a different passage and a different time. There are some very important lessons for us to get out of these verses. But whether or not someone should drink alcohol, or whether or not it was intoxicating, or whether or not it was alcoholic, which would be two different things, by the way, to kind of give you a little insight on where you need to be thinking about with that. But that's not the point of this. The point of this entire book, this entire gospel, is to help us to believe that Jesus is the Christ. And that's what we're going to see here in these verses especially. So you begin in verse 1 of chapter 2. He says, on the third day there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. So this on the third day, And if you go back and you start counting days in the first chapter, you're going to find that it's kind of an unusual way of putting days together. If you're going to look at it from a day perspective, it's hard to exactly know which day he's talking about here. The third day of the wedding feast, the third day of the week, the third day in relation to some of these other things he's talking about, or what. But when you're looking at the Gospel of John especially, because everything is so symbolic, thinking about it from a symbolic perspective, John's writing this way after the other Gospel writers have written their accounts of Jesus' life. And, Christians are coming to John, who's probably the last apostle that's left, and they're saying, hey, we've read what the other Gospel writers said. You were one of them that was there with him. You tell us about Jesus. And inspired by God, that's what he's doing. But writing to the church with the symbolism that's in the Gospel of John, whenever he says on the third day, Christians are going to immediately in their mind say, do what? On the third day, because there's a significance to the third day to a follower of Jesus that we'll find out is at the end of this book. But this wedding is at Galilee, at Cana in Galilee. He had been heading upwards. We saw that at the end of chapter 1, heading north to go to Galilee. And here he is at Cana in Galilee. And his mother's also there. And so there's a wedding feast. Just kind of an everyday something we've all done. We've all gone to weddings. Some of us have been in weddings. But he's going to a wedding. Jesus, and John helps us see this maybe better than any of the other gospel writers. Jesus was a man who had a regular life. Sometimes in the different movies, different depictions of Jesus, maybe just from what we read and the way we picture him, we think of him, walking around all the time with his hands folded like this, very somber and serious. But Jesus was a real man, and all of the emotions that we have as human beings were created in God's image. So, where do you think we got a sense of humor from? It's from the Lord. If you don't believe the Lord has a sense of humor, have you ever seen a duck-billed platypus? I mean, the Lord has a sense of humor. And, caring and having a good time and enjoying fellowship and all those kinds of things were things that Jesus would have done. And at a wedding, that would have certainly been the case. Now, I understand a little bit about weddings in the days of the first century in Israel. Way different than what weddings are like today. It was usually a week-long festival, so to speak, and you can read historians and Jewish writers from that time, and they'll talk about some of the responsibilities. When the family that was putting on the wedding, they would generally contract that out to certain people that would take care of the making all the arrangements, and it was a very big deal for them, of course, but it was also something that would have been a very shameful thing to have run out of any supplies. There were actually, within the Jewish tradition, that we can find lots of writings about what the penalty for that would have been for someone who was in charge of a wedding feast that would allow them to run out of supplies, and what could be done to them, how they could be sued. So that's what's going to go on here at this wedding feast. But it's interesting that Jesus is there, his mother's there. It seems that probably she's helping to make arrangements for this, or at least is more than just the average guest, in that she knows what's going on. When they run out of something, they would have tried to have hidden that, but she knows. So because she's there, because Jesus is there, because seems like she has some insider knowledge that the average guest wouldn't have, probably it was someone that was maybe kin to them, or at least very close to Jesus and his family. And we're going to see later on, just how important that was to Jesus to help them out with this. But for whatever event, it's also significant to to think about the fact that Jesus is there at a wedding feast. It's very clear to see in Scripture what God thinks about marriage and what He thinks about the home, and how seriously God takes marriage. And Jesus is, of course, going to teach about that in Matthew chapter 19. But here, Jesus being at this wedding shows not only his as God the approval of marriage, but also just the fact that, just like all of us, He had friends and He had relationships and He had people that He wanted to be around, and good times that He wanted to celebrate and to enjoy with others. So Jesus also was invited to the wedding with His disciples, it says in verse 2. And then in verse 3 it says, when the wine ran out. And again, that would have been a really bad thing. The idea, they ran short, ran out. That would have been something that would have been a terrible no-no. Great shame would have been on this family. And they probably, because they would have been either family or friends of Jesus and His family, and Jesus and His family being carpenter's family from Nazareth, probably was not very wealthy, didn't have very much. And being in the same kind of social structure, they probably didn't have very much, didn't have a lot, but they probably thought they had enough, had a guy in charge of it, we're going to meet him in a little bit, and ran out. And so when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. So she just comes up and basically, like she's informing him of the news, they have no wine. But, all of us have had mamas say something like that, where they're giving you a fact, but they're not just telling you the fact to let you know the fact. They're telling you because they want you to do something about it. Whenever your mama walked through the living room and she said, somebody's dirty clothes are over there, she wasn't just trying to inform you that. You know what that means in mama language, right, boys? You know what that means, right? Gannon's over there shaking his head. It means you get up your dirty clothes, put them up, right? Well, that's what she's saying. When she says they have no wine, she's basically saying to Jesus, you can do something about this. These are people that we love and care about, and we don't want them to be ashamed, and we don't want them to be, in this bad situation, this social faux pas, and so you can do something about this. Jesus, though, says to her, woman, and a lot of people try to make a big deal about Him calling her woman. It's not something I would do to my mama. I wouldn't say, woman, go do, whatever. My boy, Gordon, just looked up and grinned because he knows he better not talk to his mama that way. But this is not a derogatory comment. When Jesus calls her woman, this is a very loving and endearing way of speaking to her. In fact, it's the same way He speaks to her on the cross when He's looking down and saying, woman, behold your son, behold your mother. This is a term of endearment that He's using for her. He says, woman, what does that have to do with me? First of all, He's not in charge of this. He's not responsible for this. But furthermore, He says, my time has not yet come. Well, that's important, that my time has not yet come, or my hour has not yet come. You're going to see that repeated in the book of John. If you turn over to chapter 7 and verse 6, He's going to talk about that same idea, that His time had not yet come. Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. That's when His His brothers are saying that if you can do these miracles, won't you go do them out in the open where everybody can see? And Jesus says His time wasn't there yet. In chapter 8 in verse 20, towards the end, I skipped over one. Chapter 7 and verse 30. First of all, this is while He's up there at the temple and the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and there's this big discussion going on about who He is. It says they were seeking to arrest Him, but no one laid a hand on Him because His hour had not yet come, while He was still there at the temple in chapter 8 and verse 20. It says, these words He spoke in the treasury as He taught in the temple, but no one arrested Him because His hour had not yet come. It wasn't time yet. But then there's God's timetable that's in motion here, and Jesus recognizes that. You get over to chapter 12, and things have changed, because in chapter 12, this is right before they go up into that upper room. This is after he's raised Lazarus. And you notice in verse 23, Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And then you get to chapter 13 and verse 1. Before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. And then you look over in chapter 17 when Jesus is in that upper room with them and is about to go into the garden. He's trying to help them see what's going to happen, and they're just not getting it. So this is the point where Jesus kind of says, well, bless their heart, let me pray for them. And so he begins to pray. He lifts up his eyes to heaven and says, Father, the hour has come. So Jesus is on God's timetable, and he's wanting to make sure that, first of all, she understands that. Everybody understands that. But there was a certain plan that was in place of how this was going to take place, of when this was going to happen. And, because of the nature of what's going to happen here, we're going to start the ball rolling here pretty quickly. And so, my hour's not yet come, but his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. What a great statement that is. Of great faith. First of all, she trusts that Jesus is going to help them. But then she says, just do whatever he tells you. Wouldn't it be great if everybody just did what he told us? We tell our boys this, if you just do what we told you, we wouldn't have any problems. And they're like, I know. And then next time you turn around, why did you do that? I don't know. But if you just do if we just did what Jesus told us, think about how much better that things would be. So she says to these servants, it's the same word that's translated deacon in other places. That's what a deacon is a servant. And certainly there's a different level here, an official capacity, and that, 1 Timothy deals with and that kind of thing. But these are just servants that are there waiting on this feast. And his mother says, do whatever he tells you. So just to kind of show us that, they really didn't have any way to change what was going on. They look around and what do you have on hand? That's what you do when you run out of something, right? We had several years ago, I guess it was 2015, so about 5 years now. Melody's like, I don't know what you're fixing to tell. So I'll just tell it and she'll tell me if that was wrong, I guess. But 2015, I think it was, had a big whiteout blizzard predicted, and we got lots of snow. But, Saturday, because the forecast was so bad, called off services for the next day and all that. And I think we ended up getting about 15 or 16 inches of snow out here. Well, we were going to worship in our home, kind of like we're all doing right now. And we had one of our students at that time, Samuel Walker, was there. He was living up closer into the mountains, and so he had driven down to stay with us so he could make it to church the next day before everything got called off. So the six of us was going to worship together. We thought we'd put it on Facebook because we had several neighbors who were not very religious and didn't go to church anywhere, and we thought maybe they would come over and worship with us. Well, they didn't, but several members of Bear Valley ended up coming. I went out that morning. We put on Facebook like we were going to worship at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whatever it was. And I went out that morning first thing to shovel the driveway, and Melody leans out the door and she said, we have several people calling, won't know if they can come worship with us. And I'm like, well, I guess. And well, first thing you know, we had 25 or 30 people showed up at our house, and Melody and I were in the kitchen. She said, well, I hate to send them away without, fixing lunch. And we had soup the night before, so we added a little water to the soup, and she had a 20-pound bag of baked potatoes she just bought, so we popped them in the oven, and we're just looking around to figure out what we can do. We ordered some pizza, anyway, we all had a great Sunday that day. All of us that were there often talk about it. That was one of our favorite days of worship. But the point is, you just kind of, when you run out, you just kind of use what you got on hand. So they look at what do they got on hand? Well, they've got on hand these 6 stone water jars that were there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. So It's a little bit hard to know exactly, but we're not talking about a little bit. We're talking about a bunch. You probably all have a 30-gallon trash can in your garage or out in your shop or something like that. Well, think about 6 of those full of water. That's a lot of water. That's a lot of wine that it's going to be turned into. And so that's what they had on hand. And so Jesus says to the servants, remember his mother had said back in verse 5, do whatever he tells you. Here's what he tells them. Fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. That's important. They filled them to the brim, which means that there was no room for anything else to be added into it. If they'd only filled them up halfway, then you could say, well, he poured some wine in there and they stirred it up. And that. No, it was filled all the way to the very brim. There's no room for anything else in there. And then he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. So after Jesus tells them, get him some water, and they filled it up to the brim, they did. Then he says, all right, now go and bring it to the head, draw some out, bring it to the master of the feast, or the head waiter, or some translations say. This is the guy that's in charge of this wedding feast, that they would have contracted to make sure that everything went smoothly. And again, notice how simple this was done by Jesus. I mean, he didn't touch it. He didn't say the magic words. He didn't stick his finger in it. He didn't touch the side of the jars. He just said, bring me the water. And then he says, all right, now draw some out and bring it to the headmaster. And when they did that, when the master of verse 9, when the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants had drawn the water, had drawn the water knew. So they didn't tell the headmaster, the head waiter, the master of the feast, they didn't tell him what had gone on. As far as he knew, everything was just going as smooth as silk. And but the servants knew, because they're the ones that had done all this, as Jesus had told them to. When he drank some of this, he calls the bridegroom over and says to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you've kept the good wine until now. So usually people would serve the very best. You got 7 days of feasting. Lots of people that are there, lots of supplies are going to have to be had. And so you would give them the very best at the beginning, and then, make that good first impression. And then as the time wore down in the feast, as time went by, you gave them the lesser quality. Unless you were just filthy rich, you couldn't buy enough of the really good wine to last the whole week. So you just bought a little bit of good wine and then filled up the rest with. But he said, that's not what you've done. Because I drank the wine you brought out to begin with, but this wine is even better than what you brought out to begin with. And that was unusual. But there's a reason why he's doing that. We'll get to that in just a minute. So after all of this takes place, now John is going to give us these last 2 verses to kind of tell us what happens afterwards. He said, this, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee. Remember, that's what he said in verse 1, that where they were at. And manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now remember John 20, 30 through 31. Many other signs truly to Jesus are not written in this book, but these signs, what he's talking about, these signs are written so that we might believe, and believing have eternal life. So a sign is performed, and what was the results of it? The disciples believed. And we'll come back to verse 11 in just a minute. Verse 12, it says, after this he went to Capernaum, and with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Now this is interesting, because as I already mentioned, when you get over to chapter 7, and it's time to go to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths, Jesus, his mother, and his brothers are about to leave to go to Jerusalem, and his brothers begin to make fun of Jesus. They're telling him, well, won't you go, you want to do these miracles, go do them in front of everybody, so everybody know who you are. But that's not what Jesus did. But they're doing that because they don't believe. And because they don't believe, they're kind of making fun of Jesus. You know, won't you go, if you can do all this, won't you go do it, big boy? But notice what it says here 5 chapters before what happened. His brothers, not only was Jesus and his disciples and his mother at this wedding feast, but his brothers were at this wedding feast. When his disciples saw this sign, it produced faith. But in his brothers, it didn't produce faith. Now, we know later on, after it's all said and done, that his brothers are going to believe. You know, James is going to believe. But you still got this very balanced approach, it seems like, that John has given us on how he's reporting all this. He's not making it out like everybody that saw Jesus immediately believed in him. And we talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago. There's these different levels of belief, these different levels of faith that you're going to see throughout the Gospel of John. There's people that are going to believe a little bit, that has an introductory faith to Jesus. There are people that are going to grow in their faith, people that have a faith where they're willing to do whatever he says, people that think they have that kind of faith that don't really have that kind of faith, people that have no faith. And his brothers, it took them a while before, they got to the point that they were going to believe. John's very balanced about showing us that. Sometimes you'll hear somebody say, maybe you said, we'll say things like this quite often. Man, if I saw one of those miracles, I know I'd believe. No, you don't. Because everybody that saw Jesus' miracles didn't believe. We're going to find out later on that there are some of the Jews that when Jesus performed a miracle, they're going to get mad as a wet hen and they're going to that's going to make them want to kill Jesus. See? So, what are you going to do with Jesus? What do you think about him? Are you going to believe or not? So, a couple of lessons I think that's important for us to get out of John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. First of all, that Jesus was human. The Word became flesh, John 1:14, right? He's 100% man. And just like any other man, I picture Jesus at this wedding feast just like we would be if we went to a wedding or to some kind of big family event. I can see Jesus sitting at a table and he's laughing and he's eating and he's telling jokes and he's laughing at other people's jokes and maybe he and his brothers are sitting around the table. You remember that time we went fishing down there and remember that time when Daddy got on to you about that, whatever. Just like any of us would. Now, he didn't sin, but it's not a sin to eat, not a sin to have a good time. Sometimes people act like it is, but it's not. And Jesus was human, and he had a regular, as regular could be in first century Palestine, a regular life. And this wedding ceremony, him being there at this ceremony, shows that he did. Number 2, these verses show us that Jesus cared about others. And we know, we're going to get into, chapter 3 and ultimately Jesus dying on the cross and what all he's going to talk about in that upper room, about greater love hath no man than this, he lay his life down. We know Jesus loves us because he died for us, but Jesus has cared about people. When you think about, yes, Jesus loves me enough to die for me, but just the everyday little things Jesus cared about. He cared enough when his mama said, I want you to do this. He cared enough about his mama, he did it. There's some people that are going to be hurt. There's some people that are going to be ashamed. And Jesus cared enough about them to help them get out of Jesus didn't have to do that, but he did. And of course, ultimately, we're going to get to in just a minute really why that happened. But Jesus cared about others. It's one thing to care about people in the big things. If I break my leg and I'm at the hospital, it's one thing for somebody to care enough about me to go to the hospital and visit with me or whatever. But what about in the little things? What about in the everyday little things? You know, we were bragging on our oldest son, Garrett, today because without being told, he just goes in after breakfast and cleans up the kitchen and loads the dishwasher and empties the dishwasher and decided to reorganize the drawer where all the measuring cups are, you know. Well, it's one thing to do something, and no one was in there. No, he didn't. I don't know that he knew we even saw him do it. It's one thing to care enough to do the big things, but do we care enough to do the little things? And Jesus did. Number 3, we learn about Jesus. Time doesn't matter. As much as we can talk about Jesus was human, and he was 100% human, he's also 100% God. Remember, that's what he said in John chapter 1 also. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? And that's Jesus. And time doesn't matter to God because he's always been and he's always going to be. And if you think about it, how long does it take to turn? I mean, we talk about turning water into wine and the miracle that Jesus performed. Well, it's not a miracle in and of itself to turn water to wine. That happens all the time, doesn't it? You know, you go out and you plant some seeds and a grapevine grows and the water falls and the roots pull it up into the vine and it produces grapes which has juice in it. You know, it's not like it had that juice, you know, just magically appears. It's that water that plant is, but that takes some time, doesn't it? It takes some time for that process to take place, but not with Jesus, because time didn't matter to Jesus. So all he has to do is say, bring the water. Now go carry some to the headmaster. And time, he's outside the bounds of time because he's God. And then the fourth thing that we learn from this is that Jesus does good work. When Jesus does something, it's good. We're told in chapter 1 that he was the creator. Wasn't anything made that was created that he didn't create, right? And remember, after everything was created, what was said about it? It is good, right? Then he made man and he said, behold, it is very good. When Jesus does something, it's good. The very best that it can be. We need to ask ourselves, are we willing to do that? You know, especially when it comes to following Jesus. Do we want to do the best that we can at that? It's amazing, men especially, how many times we want to strive for excellence in everything. I want to be the best golf player. I want to be the best at my career, my business, whatever it is. I want to be the best husband, best daddy. Then when it comes to being a Christian, being a follower of Jesus, well, that's good enough. Good enough is never good enough for anything except for maybe following Jesus sometimes. Because everything Jesus does is the best, that's what he deserves from us, is our very best. Very best. Here's the real interesting part. You know, why did he do all this? Well, verse 11 tells us 3 results that come from this miracle that takes place at this wedding. This was the first of the signs that Jesus performed in Cana in Galilee. The first one that he performed. So why did he do it? Well, it's the first time that he's really introducing to that area, that region, who he is and what it is that makes him special. And that's important for them to understand and get. And then notice he says in verse 11, and manifested his glory. He showed his glory. How did he show his glory? Well, we've already talked about it. The fact that even though he's 100% human, he loves people enough, he cares about them to help them, that he's able to do miraculous things because he's 100% God. And everything that he does, it's the very best quality. He showed his glory. And then thirdly, it says, and his disciples believed in him. So doing this miracle caused his disciples to a certain extent to have more faith in him. They're learning to trust him a little bit more. They're learning to recognize who he is. Now, they're not going to get it. In fact, in this very chapter, we're going to find out Sunday that, you know, they're still not going to get it. They don't really understand everything yet. They won't until after his resurrection. But, you know, they're building their faith in him. Just like John 20, 30 through 31 said, that the signs would produce faith, and that through the faith you might have eternal life. So, why do we study John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12? Why would John write these 12 verses? Because these verses begin to show us God's glory, Jesus, God the Son. And that's what it's helping us to see. You know, that's the purpose of the book. So chapter 1, Jesus is God. If you're going to follow Him, you need to follow Him and you need to help others follow Him. Well, why are we going to do that? Because let me show you all these different proofs that He is the Messiah, that He is the Christ, that He is God. And this is the very first one of those that shows His glory. So the question for us then is, what are we going to do with Him? Are we going to follow Him? Or are we going to walk away? His brothers, verse 12, they're going to not follow Jesus right now. The disciples are going to believe in Him. His mother and he goes to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and he stays there for a few days. His brothers, though, they see it and they're not going to believe it. What about you? You going to believe it? You going to keep studying through John and see all these? Are you going to follow him, or are you going to turn away from it? See, that's what we've got to decide. Is by looking at the witness, by looking at the testimony, by looking at what this shows about Jesus. Do you want to follow Him? Well, if you do, then, you know, we need to make that known. We need to figure out what it is that He wants us to do. We need to make sure that we're doing the things that He tells us to do. We need to do whatever He tells you, as His mother said, right? So if we can help you with that, then let us know. If you got a question, send us a question. You can put it in the comments. You can email it to us. You can get it to us some way or another, and we'll try to answer that. If we can help you follow Jesus, then let us know that, and we'll do that as well. And we hope you'll be back on Sunday morning with us. We're going to study this next section in John chapter 2, and we're going to talk about turning over tables and what the significance of that is, and what the significance of that should be in our lives as well. So hope you'll come back Sunday evening rather, and study with us at 5 o'clock on Sunday evening on these same places that you're finding this, the Bear Valley Church of Christ Facebook page, YouTube channel, Bear Valley Bible Institute Facebook page, or my Facebook page. Our family is glad to have you in our home and studying through the Gospel of John with us. Let's pray, and then we'll finish up our study. Our Father, we're grateful for your love and mercy, and we're thankful, Father, for the fact that Jesus came to this earth. We're thankful that His glory was shown through these signs that He performed, and we're thankful, Father, that they've been recorded for us so that we can develop a faith in Him, a trust in Him, to know that through Him we can have eternal life, that we can have a right relationship with you, and that we can live with you for all of eternity. We're grateful for that hope that we have, especially in times like these when there's so many that are hurting, so many that are sad, so many that are sick, so many that are facing economic problems. We pray that you would help us to all trust in you, that you would help us to all focus on you, that we would let your love be shown to others, that we would, as followers of Jesus, that we would go through these times in such a way that shows people the hope that we have, so that they might want to follow Him as well. Father, we love you, and we're grateful for all you do for us. It's through Jesus we pray. Amen. Glad you're here. We'll see you Sunday night at 5 p.m. Be sure and go back. If you hadn't watched all the other videos, you can watch those. You can become a subscriber to the Bear Valley Church of Christ YouTube channel. And it didn't cost you anything. You'll get notifications of all the new videos put up, and you can keep studying along with us. And just remember that we love you, and God does too. Have a good night.